My life had been calm and predictable right up until the day Karen moved into the neighborhood. I had recently purchased a beautiful house, the kind of place I had always imagined living in. It sat in a quiet community with no homeowners association, which was exactly what I wanted. For me, that freedom meant everything. I work as a judge, and my professional life is rigid, structured, and often extremely stressful. When I finished a long day in court, the one thing I looked forward to was returning to a peaceful home where no one told me what I could or couldn't do with my own property. That quiet refuge kept me balanced. But the moment Karen arrived, that peace began to crumble. The day her moving truck rolled into the neighborhood, she immediately began making her presence known. Within hours, she was already knocking on doors, clipboard in hand, and wearing a tight, overly polite smile. She introduced herself to everyone while enthusiastically pitching what she called a wonderful improvement for the neighborhood, forming a homeowners association. Most of my neighbors had lived here for years specifically because there was no HOA. One by one, they politely declined her proposal. When she knocked on my door, I did the same. I calmly explained that I appreciated the independence of living in a community where I didn't need approval to make simple decisions about my own house, like repainting my front door or decorating my yard. Karen's smile stiffened the moment I said that. "Oh, but an HOA protects property values," she replied in a chirpy tone that sounded more like a warning than a suggestion. "We certainly wouldn't want things getting unruly around here, would we?" It felt like a thinly veiled threat, but I simply returned a polite smile and closed the door. At the time, I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That moment marked the beginning of a long and exhausting nightmare. Karen clearly wasn't used to hearing the word no. Her response started with small, irritating acts meant to wear me down. She began leaving passive-aggressive notes taped to my front door, complaining about the length of my lawn, even though it was perfectly maintained. A few days later, she criticized the color of my welcome mat, claiming it clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. At first, I ignored her behavior. I assumed she would eventually grow tired of bothering someone who refused to engage. That assumption turned out to be a huge mistake. Her actions quickly escalated. One morning, I stepped outside and froze in disbelief. My prize-winning rose bushes, plants I'd spent years carefully cultivating, had been brutally cut down and left scattered across the ground. They were destroyed. I was almost certain Karen was responsible, but I had no evidence to prove it. The police couldn't act on suspicion alone. A week later, things became even worse. I walked out to my driveway and discovered that all 4 tires on my car had been slashed. Again, there was no proof tying the act to Karen. It became painfully obvious that she was trying to pressure me, either to move away or to give in and join her ridiculous HOA plan. She began holding informal neighborhood meetings on her front lawn, loudly complaining about certain residents who were supposedly dragging the community down by refusing to cooperate. Everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. I was the only person she targeted. My neighbors were sympathetic, but they were also afraid. They saw what Karen was doing to me and didn't want to become her next victim. Instead of standing up to her, most of them kept their distance. That left me feeling isolated in my own neighborhood. The stress was overwhelming. The peaceful sanctuary I had worked so hard to create had turned into something that felt more like a battlefield. Eventually, I decided to start documenting everything. I saved every note she left, recorded every incident of damage, and carefully wrote down dates and times of her harassment. I also installed several security cameras around my property, hoping they would finally catch her in the act. And eventually they did. One evening, my phone buzzed with an alert from my camera system. When I opened the live feed, my stomach dropped. A figure had slipped onto my property, and even in the dim lighting, I immediately recognized her. It was Karen. She was holding a small gasoline can. My heart started racing as I watched her walk toward my brand-new wooden porch swing. Without hesitation, she began pouring gasoline all over it. The liquid soaked into the wood and dripped onto the porch floor. Then she pulled out a lighter. For a moment, she struggled to ignite it. Then suddenly a tiny flame appeared. Within seconds, a fire spread from the swing to the wooden boards of the porch itself. I grabbed my phone and called 911 immediately, my voice shaking as I explained what was happening. By the time the fire department arrived, flames were already crawling up the front of my house. Thankfully, the firefighters managed to contain the blaze before it consumed the entire structure, but the damage was devastating. My porch was completely destroyed, and the front of my home was blackened and charred. Inside, smoke and water damage had ruined walls, furniture, and flooring. Karen was arrested on the spot. The security footage of my cameras was crystal clear, leaving absolutely no doubt about what she had done. Even as officers placed her in handcuffs, she continued shouting that it had been an accident. She claimed she was only trying to send a message, by attempting to burn down my home. The legal process began soon afterward. Because I was personally involved as a victim, I immediately recused myself from anything related to the case in my own judicial district to avoid any conflict of interest. The trial was moved to a neighboring county. For months, I lived in a rental house while dealing with insurance companies, contractors, and endless paperwork. Slowly, piece by piece, my home was rebuilt, but the process was exhausting and emotionally draining. During that time, I occasionally heard rumors through neighbors that Karen had been released on bail. Apparently, she had been bragging to people that she would get away with it, claiming the charges were exaggerated and that she had influential connections who would protect her. She even told some people that she was actually the victim of a vindictive neighbor. Nearly a year passed before my house was finally restored. It looked the same as before, but emotionally it never quite felt the same. The damage left deeper scars in burned wood and smoke-stained walls. Then one day something unexpected happened. I received a notice from the court administration office. Because of several scheduling conflicts and judicial reassignments, I had been temporarily assigned to preside over cases at the courthouse in the neighboring county, the very same courthouse where Karen's trial was scheduled to take place. My heart skipped when I checked the docket. There it was, the People versus Karen Smith, and listed as the presiding judge was me. I immediately contacted a senior administrative judge and explained the entire situation, my history with the defendant, the fire, and my earlier recusal. He reviewed the file carefully, reading through the police reports and my original statement. For several moments, he said nothing. Then he looked up at me. "Judge," he said, "you were the victim of this crime, and you properly recused yourself earlier. However, the defense never filed a motion to disqualify you, and the prosecution has no objection given the overwhelming evidence. Legally speaking, there is nothing preventing you from presiding over this trial." He paused before adding quietly, "And considering the defendant's behavior, perhaps facing the full consequences in this courtroom is the only way she will truly understand the seriousness of what she did." After thinking it through, I made my decision. I would preside over the trial, not as a victim seeking revenge, but as a judge bound by the law to ensure a fair and impartial process. The morning of the trial arrived. I entered the courtroom and took my seat on the bench, my black robes representing the authority and responsibility of my position. The prosecutor was ready. The jury was seated. Then I saw Karen. She sat at the defense table whispering confidently with her attorney, wearing the same smug expression I remembered from our early encounters. She hadn't looked up at the bench yet. Her lawyer stood as the bailiff called out, "All rise." The room fell silent as everyone stood. Karen slowly got to her feet while adjusting her suit jacket, still looking down. I cleared my throat and spoke. "This court is now in session. We are here today for the trial of the People versus Karen Smith." At the sound of my voice, Karen's head snapped upward. Her eyes widened in shock as recognition hit her. The smug confidence vanished instantly. Her mouth hung open as all the color drained from her face. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. Staggering slightly, she raised a trembling hand to cover her mouth while staring directly at me. It was clear she was struggling to process the reality of what she was seeing. The woman whose house she had tried to burn down was now the judge presiding over her trial. The proceedings themselves didn't last long. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The jury watched the security footage showing her pouring gasoline and lighting the fire. Prosecutors read her text messages where she openly bragged about harassing me. Several neighbors, finally feeling safe enough to speak out, testified about the intimidation she had inflicted on the community. Her defense strategy collapsed quickly. Her lawyer attempted to argue that she had been under emotional distress due to the pressures of moving to a new neighborhood. No one in the courtroom believed it. After deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all charges: arson, property destruction, and stalking. When it was time for sentencing, I looked directly at Karen. The arrogance she once carried had completely disappeared, replaced by tears and trembling fear. Karen Smith, I began firmly. You attempted to take a peaceful community and bend it to your will through intimidation and fear. When you were unable to force others to comply, you escalated your behavior into acts of harassment and ultimately into violence. I paused before continuing. You set fire to my home, an act that could have taken my life. Your actions caused lasting damage not only to property, but to a sense of safety that every homeowner deserves. Throughout this entire process, you have shown no genuine remorse, only arrogance and denial. You believe you were above the law. I looked at her steadily. Today you have learned that you are not. The sentence I delivered was severe, but fully justified under the law. She received a lengthy prison term, substantial financial penalties, and a permanent restraining order preventing her from ever approaching me again. As the bailiffs escorted her away in handcuffs, Karen broke down in sobs, finally realizing the real consequences of everything she had done. Justice had been served, not by a vengeful victim, but by a judge who simply upheld the law. That evening I returned home, truly home. For the first time in a long while, the silence in my house felt peaceful again.